So I used to have your job.
You still have all of it?
No, I gave it up.
I'll hire you, and all I need to do is bide my time until you fail.
What's this job? You could write a book. The definitive Miranda Priestley.
You're wearing to the dinner. That's all.
An embroidered two-piece totem set, but not the terracotta because
Next time. Oh my God, just hide a feeling for once, please.
Is The Devil Wears Prada 2 really bringing back the ruthless fashion queen, or is it just riding on nostalgia? In today's video on Kako Film, we are uncovering hidden facts, returning characters, and everything you missed about this highly anticipated sequel. From shocking plot details to behind the scenes secrets, here's the truth about The Devil Wears Prada 2. The Devil Wears Prada 2 is a 2026 American comedy drama movie directed by David Frankel and written by Aline Brosh McKenna. The film is a sequel to the 2006 movie The Devil Wears Prada. In this new sequel, Meryl Streep, Anne Hathaway, Emily Blunt, and Stanley Tucci return to play their famous roles again. The movie also introduces new cast members, including Justin Theroux, Lucy Liu, and Kenneth Branagh. The story takes place about 20 years after the events of the first film. It follows Andy Sachs, played by Hathaway, who once again crosses paths with the powerful fashion editor Miranda Priestley, played by Streep. In this sequel, Andy helps Miranda deal with the challenges of the modern media world, while the famous Runway magazine faces serious corporate threats that could put its future at risk. Even though the first movie was a huge success, both Streep and Hathaway were not very sure at first about making a sequel. For many years, there were discussions but no real plans to continue the story. Finally, in July 2024, development for the sequel officially began. All four main actors, Streep, Hathaway, Blunt, and Tucci, agreed to return and play their characters again. At the same time, Frankel returned to direct the film, and McKenna came back to write the screenplay. As production moved forward, several new actors were announced to join the project, with casting updates continuing until November 2025. Filming for the movie started in June 2025 and continued until October 2025. Most of the shooting took place in Manhattan, New York, and in Milan, Italy, two cities closely connected with the fashion world. Some additional scenes were also filmed in Newark, New Jersey. The Devil Wears Prada 2 had its world premiere in New York on April 20, 2026. After the premiere event, the movie was officially released in theaters across the United States on May 1 by 20th Century Studios. The film received generally positive reactions from critics, with many praising the returning cast and the updated story about the changing media industry. At the box office, the movie performed very well. It earned about $441.4 million worldwide, while its production budget was around $100 million. Because of this strong performance, the film became one of the biggest hits of the year and ranked as the fifth highest grossing movie of 2026. 20 years after leaving her job as an assistant at The Devil Wears Prada magazine runway, Andrea Andy Sachs has become a well known reporter in New York City. One night, while attending an awards gala, Andy and her entire newsroom suddenly lose their jobs when they receive a layoff message by text. At the same time, her former boss Miranda Priestley is facing criticism after Runway publishes a flattering article about a fashion brand that secretly uses sweatshop labor. To repair the magazine's reputation, Irv Ravitz, the owner of Runway's parent company Elias Clark and Miranda's boss, decides to hire Andy as the magazine's new features editor. He does this without asking Miranda first, which makes her very annoyed. Miranda, who once ruled the fashion world with complete authority, now seems tired and less confident. She struggles to understand the modern fashion media environment. Some of her strict and demanding behavior at the office still exists, but constant complaints to the human resources department have limited how harsh she can be with employees. Miranda's trusted colleague Nigel explains that almost no one reads the printed version of Runway anymore. Because of this, the brand has been forced to focus on online content such as clickbait headlines and short, cheaply produced videos in order to keep making money and keep advertisers interested. One of the most important advertisers is the luxury fashion brand Dior, where Andy's former coworker Emily now works. Emily uses the recent runway controversy to arrange an interview that benefits her company, and Miranda assigns Andy to handle the story. During the interview, Emily and Andy argue about how modern fashion brands keep raising prices, making high fashion inaccessible for many middle class people. At first, Andy writes serious and thoughtful articles, but they receive very little attention from readers. Eventually, she saves her reputation at Runway by arranging a rare interview with Sasha Barnes, the very private ex wife of a wealthy Silicon Valley billionaire. Around the same time, Eve promises to promote Miranda to the powerful position of global head of content at Elias Clark. However, before he can officially announce the promotion, Irv suddenly dies from a heart attack on his 75th birthday. His son Jay takes over the company, but unlike his father, he has no emotional connection to fashion or to Runway magazine. Jay decides to delay Miranda's promotion and hires management consultants to find ways to reduce company costs. To Andy's surprise, Miranda does not strongly fight against these changes and instead tolerates them quietly. Meanwhile, Andy's personal life becomes complicated. Her relationship with her new boyfriend Peter starts to fall apart after she accidentally insults his job as an apartment renovator while worrying about possibly losing her own career. Feeling uncertain about her future, Andy begins thinking about writing a revealing book about her experiences with Miranda. A publisher offers her a very profitable contract for the project, but Andy feels conflicted about whether she should betray Miranda's trust. During Milan Fashion Week, Nige organizes what might be Runway's final grand gala event, featuring a performance by Lady Gaga. Andy comes up with a plan to save Runway, by convincing a wealthy investor to buy the magazine from Jay. The potential buyer is Benji, Sasha's former husband and Emily's current boyfriend. Andy and Emily explain their idea to Miranda, but Miranda becomes furious when she realizes Emily Cicural's plans to take control of Runway and fire Miranda from the magazine. Emily admits that this is true. Miranda then reveals that she once pushed Emily away from fashion journalism because she believed Emily lacked true creative vision. Although Miranda tries to accept the situation calmly, she becomes worried after hearing Benji talk about turning the fashion media industry into a world dominated by artificial intelligence. In order to stop Benji and Emily from ruining Runway, Miranda tells Andy to find another buyer who can compete with them. Andy successfully convinces Sasha Barnes to buy not only Runway magazine but the entire Elias Clark company. Jay accepts Sasha's offer and cancels his agreement with Benji. During this time, Miranda finally realizes that she has not appreciated Nigel's loyalty and support over the years. To make things right, she invites Nigel to give the main speech at the gala instead of her, while she and Andy complete the final business deal with Sasha. Sasha then gives Miranda the promotion that Irv had originally promised her. When the Runway team returns to New York, Miranda privately tells Andy that Andy's optimism and determination inspired her to fight for the magazine again. Miranda also reveals that she already knows about Andy's plan to write a book about her and even encourages Andy to write it honestly, including the negative parts of Miranda's life and career. In the end, Andy repairs her relationship with Peter and also reconciles with Emily, who has broken up with Benji. Nigel later admits that he was the one who convinced Irv to rehire Andy because he had always believed in her talent. Miranda gives Andy a better office and returns to leading Runway with her familiar confidence and authority. Production The Long Road Back to Runway. Few sequels in Hollywood history have been as eagerly anticipated or as carefully constructed as The Devil Wears Prada 2. The 2026 comedy drama, directed once again by David Frankel and written by the returning Aline Brosh McKenna, represents the culmination of years of negotiations, creative discussions, and the delicate process of reassembling one of the most beloved ensembles in modern cinema. With a budget of $100 million and distributed by 20th Century Studios, the film reunites Meryl Streep, Anne Hathaway, Emily Blunt, and Stanley Tucci in their iconic roles while welcoming a distinguished roster of new faces, including Justin Theroux, Kenneth Branagh, Simone Ashley, Lucy Liu, and B.J. Novak, into the glittering, cutthroat world of Runway magazine. The film picks up 2 decades after the events of the original. Andy Sachs is no longer a nervous assistant fetching coffee in oversized Chanel. She is a seasoned, respected journalist navigating New York's increasingly unstable media landscape. When her entire newsroom is laid off by text message during an awards gala, a detail that feels almost too real to be satirical, she finds herself improbably thrust back into the orbit of Miranda Priestley, who is herself fighting for the survival of Runway in an age of clickbait, short form video content, and AI driven media conglomerates. The thematic territory is sharper and more contemporary than the original's fish out of water premise, using the fashion world as a lens through which to examine the collapse of print media, the corrupting influence of tech money, and the question of whether creative integrity can survive in an algorithm driven world. The production of this film was not just a logistical exercise, it was, in many ways, a cultural event. From the moment development was confirmed in July 2024, the film dominated entertainment headlines for the better part of 2 years. Casting announcements arrived in waves. Set photos were dissected by fans. Trailer releases broke records. And the premiere itself was live streamed on Disney Plus and Hulu, an acknowledgement that the appetite for this film transcended the typical theatrical audience. To understand how The Devil Wears Prada 2 was made, one must trace the full arc of its creation, from the years of reluctance that preceded it, through the frantic energy of its Manhattan shoot, to the controversies that accompanied its release. Development and pre-production from novel sequel to screen reality. The origins of the project, the story of The Devil Wears Prada 2, begins not with a Hollywood pitch meeting but with a book. In 2013, Lauren Weisberger, whose 2003 debut novel The Devil Wears Prada had been adapted into the hugely successful 2006 film, published Revenge Wears Prada, The Devil Returns, a sequel that continued the adventures of Andy Sachs and returned to the orbit of Miranda Priestley. The novel was received with considerable commercial interest, and speculation about a film adaptation began almost immediately. Yet, for years, the project appeared to be a non starter, largely because the two key elements that would make it work, Meryl Streep and Anne Hathaway, were unenthusiastic about returning. Starring cast members Streep and Hathaway were not eager to do a sequel, with Streep reportedly saying she was not interested and Hathaway stating she would like to work with the same people on something totally different. These are not unreasonable positions. Both actors had spent the years since 2006 building careers of tremendous range and distinction. Streep had won her third Academy Award for The Iron Lady 2011, and Hathaway had won her first for Les Miserables 2012. The prospect of revisiting characters that, however iconic, represented a specific chapter of their careers, and doing so in the shadow of enormous public expectation, was understandably daunting. A sequel to a beloved film is one of Hollywood's riskiest propositions. The potential upside is limited by nostalgia, while the potential downside involves damaging the memory of something people love. What changed? The answer appears to be a combination of timing, creative alignment, and the involvement of the right people. In July 2024, it was reported that Walt Disney Studios, the parent division of 20th Century Studios, was interested in developing a sequel. Negotiations began that month with Aline Brosh McKenna returning to write the screenplay and Streep, Hathaway, Emily Blunt, and Stanley Tucci reprising their roles from the first film. The return of McKenna was a crucial element. She had been responsible for the sharp, witty, emotionally intelligent screenplay of the original, a script that transformed what could have been a shallow fashion satire into a genuinely moving story about ambition, compromise, and identity. Her involvement signaled that this would not be a cynical cash grab, but a genuine attempt to continue the story with intelligence and care. The fact that all four principal cast members agreed to return simultaneously was itself remarkable. Streep, Hathaway, Blunt, and Tucci each brought formidable leverage to their negotiations. Any one of them could have held the project hostage or walked away, fatally undermining the enterprise. That all four came aboard at once suggested either extraordinary coordination behind the scenes or, more likely, a combination of creative excitement about McKenna's take on the material and a collective recognition that the timing felt right. Nearly 2 decades after the original, the world had changed enough to give their characters somewhere genuinely interesting to go. Assembling the new cast, a who's who of contemporary Hollywood once, the core four were confirmed. The production turned to the question of new additions. The casting process unfolded in stages over the course of roughly a year, with an announcements arriving in clusters and generating considerable press coverage at each turn. Principal photography began on June 30, 2025, with David Frankel again directing and Kenneth Branagh joining the cast. Branagh, one of the most celebrated actor-directors of his generation, was cast as Stuart, Miranda's new husband, a role that positioned him as a significant but not dominant presence in Miranda's personal life. His casting was announced on the same day filming began, a detail that underscored the production's remarkable efficiency in aligning all its pieces before shooting commenced. In July, it was announced that Tracy Thoms and Tibor Feldman were reprising their roles, with Simone Ashley, Lucy Theroux, B.J. Novak, Pauline Chalamet, Rachel Bloom, and Patrick Bramall as new additions to the cast. Each of these additions brought something distinct to the ensemble. Simone Ashley, fresh from her breakout role in Bridgerton, was cast as Amari Mari, Miranda's current first assistant, a role that invited obvious comparisons to Emily Blunt's Emily Charlton from the original, though Ashley's character occupies a different position in the story's hierarchy. Lucy Liu, a veteran of both prestige drama and crowd pleasing genre work, took on the role of Sasha Barnes, the wealthy ex wife of tech billionaire Benji Barnes, and a pivotal figure in the film's third act, maneuvering around the ownership of Runway. Justin Theroux, cast as Benji Barnes, emerged as one of the film's central antagonists, a Silicon Valley figure whose vision of an AI driven future represents an existential threat not just to Miranda's magazine but to the very concept of human creative judgment. BJ Novak was cast as Jay Ravitz, the son of Runway's longtime chairman Irv Ravitz, who steps in after his father's death to install management consultants and threaten everything Miranda has built. Patrick Bramall took on the role of Pita, Andy's new love interest, a significant piece of character construction given that the original film's central romantic tension involved Adrian Grenier's Nate, who does not appear in the sequel. Rachel Bloom joined as Tessa, one of Andy's friends, and Pauline Chalamet, younger sister of Timothy, was also confirmed as part of the ensemble. The casting of Tibor Feldman as Irv Ravitz, reprising a role he played in the original, was a pleasing continuity detail for fans of the first film, while the addition of Conrad Ricamora and Caleb Heron in supporting roles, Heron as Charlie, Miranda's current second assistant, further fleshed out the world of Runway in its contemporary incarnation. Helen J. Shane was cast as Jin Chao, Andy's assistant, a character who would later become the subject of significant controversy. Notable cameo appearances. The production also attracted a remarkable collection of cameo appearances from figures spanning fashion, music, and entertainment. Donatella Versace was seen on set filming a cameo appearance during the Milan shoot in October 2025, continuing a tradition established by the original film's use of real fashion industry figures. Versace's presence in the film is both an aesthetic flourish and a mark of legitimacy, a signal that the fashion world was willing to take the production seriously as a cultural document. Perhaps the most significant addition, however, was Lady Gaga. Lady Gaga was announced to be having a role in the film in October 2025, generating enormous excitement among fans of both the singer and the franchise. In the film's narrative, Gaga performs at what may be Nigel's last great runway gala in Milan, a climactic sequence that brings the film's themes of artistic survival and cultural legacy into sharp focus. Singer Ciara was also spotted on set in August 2025, wearing what was described as a sexy black gown, suggesting a glamorous party sequence or fashion event. Ashley Graham, the celebrated model and body positivity advocate, also appeared in the film. The casting of Jang Won-young, the South Korean singer and member of the K-pop group IVE, for an interview segment with Streep and Hathaway during the film's South Korean promotional tour, was not technically a part of the film's production, but it spoke to the global ambitions of the project. In April 2026, Streep and Hathaway traveled to South Korea to promote the film and participated in an interview with singer Jang Won-young, a moment that underscored the film's particular appeal to Asian audiences, even as a separate controversy about the film's portrayal of an Asian character was simultaneously unfolding. Filming New York, the heartbeat of Runway Returns principal photography officially commenced on June 30, 2025, with the production setting up camp in Manhattan, the spiritual home of both Runway magazine and the characters who inhabit it. The decision to shoot on location in New York rather than recreating the city on a studio backlot was consistent with the approach of the original film and gave the sequel an authentic, lived in quality that would have been difficult to replicate artificially. Streep, Hathaway, and Tucci were spotted filming in Manhattan during the week of July 21, 2025. The sightings were immediately documented by fans and entertainment media alike, generating the kind of organic publicity that no marketing campaign could manufacture. Images of Streep in the white-haired glory of Miranda Priestley striding through New York City streets, flanked by cameras and crew but photographed by onlookers, created a visual shorthand for the sequel's existence that communicated everything about its tone and ambition. Blunt was spotted for the first time a week later in late July. Her presence confirmed what the casting announcements had promised. Emily Charlton, now a senior executive at Dior, was back in the world of the film and would be a significant force in its plot. Blunt's Emily is no longer the imperious first assistant she was in the original. She has achieved a kind of corporate power that Miranda once represented, but her relationship with Andy remains fraught, defined by old wounds and new competition. Bramall and Hathaway were spotted filming a scene together on August 5, offering the first visual confirmation of the Andy Peter romantic subplot that would thread through the film. The following day, another unexpected figure appeared on set. Sydney Sweeney was spotted on set with Blunt on August 7. Sweeney's presence immediately sparked speculation about her role, with fans theorizing she might be playing a character connected to Dior or appearing as herself. The truth, as revealed later, was more complicated. The Manhattan shoot was wide ranging, taking in locations that captured both the glamour and the precariousness of New York's media world. The film's opening sequence, in which Andy's entire newsroom is laid off by text during an awards gala, required the kind of bustling, formally dressed crowd that could only be convincingly staged in New York's real event spaces. The runway offices themselves, with their intimidating architecture and pristine design, had to be recreated or located in interiors that matched the grandeur the brand demanded. Newark and the airport sequence. Not all of the film's New York area shooting took place in Manhattan. An important airport scene was shot at Newark on September 10, 2025. The choice of Newark Airport rather than, say, JFK or LaGuardia may reflect both practical considerations about filming access and a subtle narrative point. Newark is a slightly less glamorous gateway than the other New York area airports, and having Miranda Priestley, who is at this point in the film being forced to fly economy class, pass through it carries a gentle humiliation that fits the story's arc. The airport sequence is described as important, suggesting it may serve as a turning point or revelation scene rather than mere connective tissue. Milan. Fashion Week and the film's operatic climax. If Manhattan provided the film's everyday rhythms, Milan provided its operatic heights. The decision to send the production to Italy for the film's climactic sequences was consistent with the original film's use of the Paris Fashion Week as its emotional and narrative peak. In the sequel, it is Milan Fashion Week that serves as the backdrop for the film's most dramatic confrontations and its most visually spectacular set pieces. Tucci and Streep filmed at the Dolce & Gabbana Milan Fashion Week show on September 27. The real-world integration of the film's characters into an actual Fashion Week event was a bold choice. It meant that Streep and Tucci, in character as Miranda and Nigel, were present at a genuine fashion industry occasion, surrounded by real models, designers, and industry figures. The resulting footage presumably carries a documentary authenticity that stage recreations could not achieve. Filming took place in Milan, Italy from October 6 to 18. This 2-week Italian shoot would have involved the grand gala sequence featuring Lady Gaga, the confrontations between Miranda, Andy, and Emily over the fate of Runway, and the film's resolution in which Sasha Barnes outbids her ex-husband to give Miranda both the magazine and the promotion Irv had promised. The Milan sequences carry the weight of the film's thematic argument that great creative institutions are worth fighting for, even when the fight is ugly and the motives of the fighters are mixed. In October, Donatella Versace was seen on set filming a cameo appearance, and Ashley finished filming her scenes on October 17, 2025. Simone Ashley's confirmation that she had rapped was one of the production's more charming social media moments, announced via the actress's own channels and received with warmth by fans who had followed the shoot's progress. Filming officially wrapped on October 20, 2025. The completion of principal photography marked the end of a shoot that had lasted just under 4 months, spanned 2 continents, and incorporated real-world fashion events alongside fictional narrative sequences. Justin Theroux marked the occasion by sharing photos on social media of himself alongside Hathaway and other cast members, offering fans a behind the scenes glimpse of the camaraderie that had developed during production. Sydney Sweeney's cut cameo. One of the more intriguing production stories to emerge in the film's post shoot period concerned Sydney Sweeney. Having been spotted on set with Emily Blunt in early August, Sweeney had been widely assumed to have a role in the finished film, perhaps a cameo appearance as herself, which would have been consistent with the film's use of real fashion and entertainment figures. In April 2026, it was revealed that Sweeney, who was meant to cameo as herself, was cut from the finished film. The reasons for her removal were not fully disclosed, but the incident serves as a reminder that the gap between filming and finished product can involve significant creative decisions. Not everything that is shot ends up on screen, and the editorial process of shaping a film's rhythm and tone sometimes requires the sacrifice of even well publicized elements. Post production editing, color grading, and the visual debate post production on The Devil Wears Prada 2 proceeded through the latter months of 2025 and into early 2026, with the editing process managed by Andrew Marcus, the same editor who had cut the original film. Marcus's return ensured continuity in the film's rhythmic sensibility, its balance of comedic timing and emotional weight. The first major public engagement with the post production work came with the release of the teaser trailer in November 2025. The first teaser trailer was released on November 12, 2025. Its impact was immediate and extraordinary. It was reportedly the most viewed comedy trailer in 15 years, with 181. 5 million views in its first 24 hours alone. These numbers confirmed what the industry had suspected, that the appetite for this film was enormous, crossing demographic lines and generating enthusiasm among both longtime fans of the original and younger viewers who had discovered it through streaming. Yet the trailer also sparked a debate that extended well beyond the film itself. The film's color grading and lighting, as presented in the trailer, sparked numerous comments on social media and in the press, lamenting the widespread adoption of the Netflix look across the film industry, standardized colors, loss of contrast, resulting in a smooth and flat visual rendering. This criticism touched on a broader anxiety in contemporary film culture about the homogenization of visual aesthetics. The original The Devil Wears Prada had a distinctive look, warm, textured, with a sense of depth and contrast that reflected the richness of the fashion world it depicted. The teaser trailer's flatter, more digital appearance struck some viewers as a betrayal of that visual identity, regardless of whether the final film's aesthetic would match or differ from the preview footage. Cinematographer Florian Ballhaus, who shot the film, faced the challenge of making a visually sumptuous movie about fashion in an era when the tools and norms of digital cinematography tend toward a particular kind of smooth, processed look. Whether the criticisms raised by the trailer ultimately applied to the finished film, or whether the color grading was adjusted before final release, remained a matter of debate among cinephiles. What the controversy demonstrated, regardless of its ultimate relevance to the film itself, was the degree to which audiences were invested in every detail of this production. The record breaking full trailer, The next major post-production milestone came in February 2026 with the release of the film's first full trailer. The film's first full trailer, released on February 1, 2026, recorded 222 million views within its first 24 hours, which 20th Century Studios described as the most viewed trailer in the studio's history. The numbers were astonishing by any standard. 222 million views in 24 hours represents a level of engagement that most films never achieve over their entire theatrical runs. The figure eclipsed the records set by the teaser and confirmed that The Devil Wears Prada 2 had transcended the usual parameters of franchise anticipation to become a genuine pop cultural event. The full trailer offered a much more complete picture of the film's narrative and tone. It introduced the new characters Benji Barnes, Sasha, Jay Ravitz, Peter within the context of the returning ensemble, and gave audiences their first proper look at the film's dual setting of New York and Milan. It also previewed the film's central conflict, the battle over the soul of Runway between Miranda's creative vision, Andy's journalistic integrity, Emily's corporate ambition, and Benji's tech-inflected futurism. Music Theodore Shapiro's return and the score the musical identity of The Devil Wears Prada 2 was entrusted to Theodore Shapiro, who had composed the score for the original film. Shapiro's music for the first film had been elegant and propulsive, supporting the story's transformation narrative with themes that evolved as Andy evolved. His return for the sequel suggested a desire to maintain musical continuity while adapting the score to the sequel's more complex, raw, and sometimes melancholy territory. The score for the sequel had to serve a different emotional register than the original. Where the first film's music often tracked Andy's breathless adaptation to an alien world, the sequel is about characters navigating a world they already know, but which has changed around them. Miranda's themes, in particular, would need to carry both her familiar imperious authority and the new vulnerability that the film grants her. The vulnerability of someone who has mastered a world that is disappearing. Runway, Lady Gaga, and Doeki collaborate. The film's most talked about musical contribution, however, came not from Shapiro's orchestral score but from an original song created specifically for the film. The second trailer for The Devil Wears Prada 2 included a preview of Runway, an original song performed by Lady Gaga and Doeki. The track, which shares its title with the fictional magazine led by Miranda Priestley, featured a house pop style and accompanied the trailer. The collaboration between Gaga and Doeki was a genuinely exciting pairing. Lady Gaga's history with fashion adjacent art and her appearance in the film itself made her a natural choice to perform the film's signature song. Doeki, one of the most critically celebrated new voices in contemporary hip hop and R&B, brought a rawer, more contemporary energy to the collaboration that prevented it from feeling like mere nostalgia. The house pop production gave the song a propulsive, danceable quality appropriate to the world of fashion weeks and glamorous galas. The song was released as a single on April 9, 2026, 3 weeks before the film's theatrical opening. The release timing was well judged, giving the song time to build momentum on streaming platforms and radio before the film's debut, while keeping the promotional conversation active. Runway arrived at a moment when both Gaga and Doeki had significant cultural momentum, and the combination of their names on a single attached to one of the year's most anticipated films ensured it would receive immediate attention. The decision to name the song Runway, a word that functions simultaneously as a reference to fashion's most iconic performance space, as a nod to the fictional magazine at the heart of the story, and as a metaphor for escape or departure, was clever. It allowed the song to operate as both a promotional tool and a thematically relevant piece of music, one that could be appreciated independently of the film, while also enriching the film's emotional landscape when encountered in context. Release theatrical premiere circuit. The theatrical release of The Devil Wears Prada 2 followed a carefully orchestrated global premiere circuit that recognized the film's international appeal while anchoring it firmly in its New York roots. The Devil Wears Prada 2 had its premiere at the Lincoln Center in New York City on April 20, 2026, with the event being live streamed on Disney Plus and Hulu. The choice of Lincoln Center, one of New York's great cultural landmarks, home to the Metropolitan Opera, the New York City Ballet, and the Film Society of Lincoln Center, was a statement of intent. This was not a film that would premiere in a multiplex. It was a cultural occasion deserving of a cultural institution. The live streaming arrangement on Disney Plus and Hulu was a distinctly contemporary touch, acknowledging that the film's global fan base could not all travel to New York for the premiere, but deserved to participate in the event regardless. The New York premiere red carpet attracted Streep, Hathaway, Blunt, Lady Gaga, and the broader ensemble, generating the kind of fashion forward images that were inevitable given the film's subject matter. Everyone attending understood that their clothing choices would be analyzed and dissected, and the cast delivered accordingly. Another premiere was held on April 22 in London. The London premiere acknowledged the British connection within the film's own cast. Blunt and Branagh are both British, and the strong fan base for the original film in the UK. The film premiered in Tokyo at Roppongi Hills on April 24. The Japan premiere was a particularly high profile affair, attended by members of the K-pop and J-pop world. The Walker press coverage noted that Twice members Momo and Sana attended in red dresses, striding down what was described as a runway. The Asian premiere tour was clearly an important component of the film's global marketing strategy, particularly given the significance of Asian audiences to major Hollywood releases. US theatrical release the film was released in theaters in the United States on May 1, 2026. The May 1 release date placed it at the beginning of the traditional summer movie season, a position that gave it maximum exposure while avoiding the congested Thanksgiving and Christmas windows where prestige films tend to cluster. The May date also gave the film room to breathe, to build word of mouth and return viewing before the summer's bigger tentpole releases arrived to dominate the conversation. Home media, while specific home media release dates had not been publicly confirmed as of the theatrical opening, the film's distribution through 20th Century Studios, which operates under the Walt Disney Company umbrella, positioned it for eventual release on Disney Plus following its theatrical window. The live streaming of the premiere event on Disney Plus and Hulu had already signaled the platform's investment in the film, and a streaming release would have been consistent with Disney's practice of releasing its major theatrical titles on its flagship streaming service after the standard theatrical exclusivity period. For a film of this profile, with demonstrated appeal across a broad demographic range, the home media release would represent a second wave of cultural conversation. Reception box office performance. The box office performance of The Devil Wears Prada 2 was a subject of intense industry speculation in the days leading up to its opening. Pre release projections were bullish. Variety's Rebecca Rubin reported that the film was poised for a massive debut above $80 million domestically and $180 million globally. These numbers, if realized, would represent an exceptional opening for a comedy drama, a genre that has historically struggled to match the opening weekend figures of action blockbusters and animated films. The projection reflected both the film's built in audience of original fans and the enormous enthusiasm generated by the record breaking trailers. The film carried a production budget of $100 million, a substantial investment for a non franchise comedy drama, reflecting both the cost of assembling its star studded cast and the expense of shooting on location in New York and Milan. A film of this scale requires a meaningful global box office performance to be considered a commercial success, and the pre release projection suggested the industry was confident it would deliver. The accumulated box office figure noted in available records stood at $47 million at the time of initial tracking, a figure that likely represents the film's domestic opening weekend rather than its full theatrical run, given that the film opened on May 1, 2026, and a complete global total would require additional weeks of the data. The film's performance in international markets, particularly in Europe, where the fashion world settings would resonate strongly, and in Asia, where the K pop connections and extensive Asian premiere tour might have driven interest, would be crucial components of its ultimate box office story. What is clear from the pre release tracking and the enthusiasm generated by the trailers is that The Devil Wears Prada 2 arrived with genuine commercial momentum. The question of whether it could sustain that momentum through positive word of mouth or whether mixed reviews and the controversy surrounding its Asian character would complicate its audience reach remained to be seen as its theatrical run progressed. Critical response. The Rotten Tomatoes consensus and Metacritic's score. The critical reception for The Devil Wears Prada 2 settled into a pattern of general positivity tempered by reservations. Response that acknowledged the film's considerable pleasures while noting of its specifies, while noting that could not quite match the freshness and emotional power of its predecessor. On the review aggregator website Rotten Tomatoes, 78% of 162 critics' reviews are positive. The website's consensus reads: Meryl Streep still wears Miranda Priestley like a finely tailored suit in this sinfully enjoyable sequel, which is dressed to the nines in off the rack wish fulfillment and some trenchant observations about the state of modern media. The 78% fresh rating placed the film in comfortable, certified fresh territory, a meaningful critical endorsement for a sequel that had everything to lose and only a little to gain from comparison to its beloved original. The Rotten Tomatoes consensus is itself a minor masterpiece of critical summary. The phrase Meryl Streep still wears Miranda Priestley like a finely tailored suit captures precisely what makes the film work. The sense that Streep has inhabited this character so completely that the fit is effortless and that 2 decades have only deepened rather than dulled the performance. The acknowledgement of off the rack wish fulfillment is an honest admission that the sequel indulges in the kind of glossy fantasy escapism that the original also traded in, and trenchant observations about the state of modern media credits the film for doing something more than simply revisiting familiar pleasures. Metacritic, which uses a weighted average, assigned the film a score of 62 out of 100 based on 50 critics, indicating generally favorable reviews. The 62 on Metacritic, while lower than the Rotten Tomatoes percentage might suggest, is consistent with a film that divides critics between enthusiastic supporters and more skeptical voices. Metacritic's weighted average system tends to penalize films that generate strong divergence of opinion, and a score in the low to mid 60s typically indicates a film that is enjoyed by most but embraced wholeheartedly by fewer. Praise for the performances and social commentary among the positive reviews. Several critics singled out the performances and the film's engagement with contemporary media anxieties as particular strengths. Justin Chang of The New Yorker wrote that the film is selling a truckload of preposterous goods, but it sells them awfully well with unfeigned assurance, conviction, and the appropriate ratio of cynicism to hope. Chang's formulation is astute. The film knows it is trading in fantasy, and it commits to that fantasy with a professionalism that makes the transaction feel worthwhile. The phrase appropriate ratio of cynicism to hope captures the film's tonal balance. It is not naive about the corruption and compromise that defines its world, but it believes, ultimately, that creativity and integrity are worth fighting for. David Sims of The Atlantic wrote, "It has plenty of breezy fun probing the dilemmas of modern media, without abandoning the glitz that made the original so enduring." Sims's review recognizes what the sequel needed to accomplish. It had to honor the original's pleasures while doing something new. The dilemmas of modern media, the collapse of print, the rise of AI driven content, the pressure to produce clickbait rather than genuine journalism, give the sequel a topicality that the original, for all its cultural insight, could not have anticipated. O.D. Henderson of the Boston Globe wrote, "Miranda is given more depth this time, which softens her just a tad, but it forces the viewer to root for her success. That would bug me, but The Devil Wears Prada 2 successfully gives journalists a bigger villain to hiss at and resent." Henderson's review touches on one of the film's most interesting structural choices. By humanizing Miranda further and positioning her against the genuinely sinister forces of tech industry disruption, it transforms her from a villain into something closer to an unlikely heroine. The bigger villain, Benji Barnes and his AI driven worldview, Jay Ravitz and his management consultants, allows Miranda's imperious perfectionism to be reframed as a defense of human creativity against algorithmic indifference. Clarice Loffrey of The Independent wrote that the film hits painfully home, and perpetual job insecurity is hardly exclusive to the media world. Yet, even for those who can't relate, there's still plenty of the indulgent, fondant pleasures to take part in. Loffrey's review situates the film's themes within a broader social context. The anxiety about layoffs, about the displacement of human workers by technology, about the instability of creative careers. These are not just media world concerns, but near universal anxieties in contemporary life. The film's success in Laurie's reading lies in its ability to make those anxieties legible through the specific lens of fashion journalism, while also offering the audience the escapist pleasures they came for. The critical dissenters. Style over substance, not all reviews were generous. Several critics found the film too comfortable in its genre pleasures to fully commit to the sharper social commentary it gestures toward. In a negative review, Moira MacDonald of the Seattle Times wrote that the film gives us a lot to look at, and Hathaway and Blunt in particular are a pleasure, but it's flat champagne, maybe worth drinking in a pinch, but unsatisfying. The flat champagne metaphor is elegantly chosen. It acknowledges the film's surface pleasures while suggesting that the essential quality that makes those pleasures worth experiencing has somehow dissipated. MacDonald's singling out of Hathaway and Blunt as pleasures within an otherwise underwhelming package echoes a general critical consensus that the performers bring more to the material than the material fully deserves. Randy Myers of the Mercury News wrote, "Yes, it is indeed a pleasure to hang out with these characters again, and there are a few good laughs here and there. But The Devil Wears Prada 2 feels like it came off the rack before it was ready. It feels about as groundbreaking as florals in spring." The fashion metaphor is irresistible in the context of a film about fashion, and Myers deploys it with precision. "Came off the rack before it was ready" suggests a film that needed more time in development to fulfill its promise. Groundbreaking as florals in spring, a reference to a famous line from the original film, is a knowing critique that positions the sequel as doing exactly what Miranda scornfully dismissed: something obvious, something expected, something that mistakes reliability for inspiration. These negative reviews, while minority positions in the overall critical landscape, identify real tensions within the film. The challenge for any sequel to a beloved original is to justify its own existence, to offer audiences something they could not get simply by rewatching the first film. The critics who found The Devil Wears Prada 2 wanting argued, essentially, that it offered the pleasures of reunion without the discoveries of genuine reinvention. The Asian stereotype controversy. Jinchao and its consequences, the most significant non-artistic controversy surrounding the film, erupted in mid-April 2026, in the days before its theatrical opening, and centered on a character whom the film's makers had seemingly not expected to be controversial. On April 16, 2026, 20th Century Studios released a promotional clip for the film on its official YouTube channel, featuring the character Andy Sachs, portrayed by Anne Hathaway, alongside her Asian assistant Jin Chao, portrayed by Chinese American actress Helen J. Shen. The clip was intended as light promotional material, giving audiences a taste of the dynamic between Andy and her new assistant before the film opened. The reaction was not what the studio anticipated. Shen's character drew criticism for its alleged use of racist tropes, as online observers noted that the character's name bore phonetic resemblance to Ching Chong, a racial slur historically used to mock the Chinese language and people. The observation spread rapidly on social media, generating a wave of criticism that the studio was not prepared for. Critics further observed that the character was portrayed wearing comparatively dowdy clothing and glasses, in contrast to other characters, and was shown reciting her academic achievements, which they interpreted as reinforcing the nerdy bookworm stereotype often associated with Asian individuals. This second layer of criticism was arguably even more damaging to the film's reputation than the name controversy, because it was not a question of phonetics or coincidence, but of deliberate visual and narrative choices. In a film about fashion, where clothing is a form of character, the decision to dress the Asian character in dowdy, unfashionable clothing was read as a pointed statement about how the film perceived her, regardless of any stated intention. According to the South China Morning Post, the character's name was initially mistakenly reported as Chinchu, which further resembled the pronunciation of the racial slur and contributed to its widespread circulation on social media. The misnaming, which circulated widely before being corrected, may have exacerbated the controversy by making the alleged offense seem even more egregious than the character's actual name warranted. The controversy sparked online backlash and debate across mainland China, Japan, South Korea, and Hong Kong, with reactions ranging from disappointment to outrage. Calls to boycott the film spread on the Chinese internet. In a global marketplace where Chinese and broader East Asian audiences represent a significant portion of a Hollywood film's potential revenue, a boycott movement, even one that ultimately does not materialize in dramatically reduced ticket sales, creates both reputational damage and commercial risk. The Hollywood Reporter's headline captured the international reaction with stark directness. What made them think, "We'll find this kind of racism funny"? A question that went to the heart of the controversy. The character was apparently intended as comic relief, and the humor was predicated on a set of assumptions about Asian identity. The nerdy academic overachiever, the unfashionable outsider, that critics argued were reductive and harmful. For a film that was simultaneously conducting an extensive promotional tour in South Korea, featuring interviews between its stars and South Korean cultural figures, the timing of the controversy was particularly uncomfortable. The promotional and cultural outreach work being done in Asia was designed to signal the film's global inclusivity. The character controversy undermined that signal directly. Whether the controversy ultimately affected the film's theatrical performance in Asian markets remained to be assessed as its run continued. What was clear is that the controversy forced a conversation about representation in Hollywood that extended well beyond the film itself, raising questions about who is in the room when creative decisions are made, what responsibilities studios have when deploying cultural stereotypes for comedic purposes, and how films intended for global audiences can fail so comprehensively to consider the perspective of audiences outside their immediate cultural context. The broader significance of the critical and cultural conversation taken together, the critical response to The Devil Wears Prada 2, the warm reception from most reviewers, the reservations of the skeptics, and the serious controversy surrounding the Jin Chao character, paints a picture of a film that is more complicated than it initially appears. It is not a masterpiece. It is not a disaster. It is a skillfully made, often enjoyable, occasionally moving sequel to a beloved film, produced with care and performed with excellence by one of the finest ensembles in recent Hollywood history, but marked by at least one significant creative decision that revealed real blind spots in its production process. The film's engagement with the state of modern media, with the death of print, the rise of tech driven content creation, the precariousness of creative careers, gives it a relevance that extends beyond its genre pleasures. Miranda Priestley's battle to preserve runway is, in the film's moral logic, a battle for the idea that human creativity and judgment still have value in a world increasingly organized around efficiency and algorithmic preference. That is an argument that resonates far beyond the fashion world, and it is perhaps the most unexpected gift that McKenna's screenplay delivers. A defense of artistic integrity that does not flinch from the compromises and failures that integrity sometimes requires. The performances, Streep's in particular, but also Hathaway's more grounded, world-weary Andy, Blunt's brittle and fascinating Emily, and Tucci's warmly melancholy Nigel, carry the film through its weaker moments and give it an emotional weight that justifies its existence beyond mere nostalgia. When Miranda finally admits to Andy that Andy's idealism inspired her to fight back for Runway, the moment lands because Streep has built to it across 2 hours with the precision and commitment that only a performer of her stature can bring. The Devil Wears Prada 2 is ultimately a film about what endures. It asks whether the things we loved, great magazines, great journalism, great fashion, great storytelling, can survive in a world that seemed designed to replace them with something cheaper and faster and more algorithmically satisfying. Its answer, characteristically, is that they can, but only if people are willing to fight for them, and only if the fight is conducted with the same ferocity and intelligence that Miranda Priestley brings to everything she does. It is a fitting theme for a sequel that itself represents a kind of fight for the endurance of something people love, and on balance, a worthwhile one. Casting Meryl Streep returns as Miranda Priestley, the iconic editor in chief of Runway magazine, reprising the role that defines cinematic fashion villainy in 2006. Streep's performance in the original earned her an Oscar nomination and cemented Miranda as a cultural touchstone for ambition, power, and icy authority. In the sequel, directed once again by David Frankel with a screenplay by Aline Brosh McKenna, Miranda faces a transformed media landscape where print journalism struggles against digital disruption, shifting priorities in fashion and internal corporate pressures. Reports and early reviews indicate Streep brings subtle layers of vulnerability to the character this time, hinting at a Miranda who must adapt or risk obsolescence while retaining her signature wit and commanding presence. Streep's commitment to the sequel reportedly required significant negotiation, as she has historically avoided sequels. Her return anchors the film, with salary reports suggesting she, along with key co-stars, commanded substantial paychecks, around $12.5 million each, under a favored nations deal. This financial alignment underscores the studio's investment in reuniting the core talent to recapture the original's magic while updating it for contemporary audiences. Streep's portrayal continues to drive the narrative tension as Miranda navigates crises at Runway and reconnects with former protege Andy Sachs. Anne Hathaway steps back into the shoes of Andrea Andy Sachs, the ambitious young journalist who survived Miranda's demanding tutelage in the first film, only to walk away in pursuit of journalistic integrity. In The Devil Wears Prada 2, Andy has evolved into a more established features editor or serious journalist facing industry wide layoffs. Her arc involves returning to runway amid its challenges, forcing a reconnection with Miranda and a confrontation with past choices amid evolving career ambitions. Hathaway's charm and relatability remain central, balancing the film's fashion spectacle with emotional grounding. Her performance highlights Andy's growth while revisiting the moral dilemmas of ambition in a high stakes environment. Hathaway's involvement was crucial for fan expectations. Like Streep, she brings continuity and star power, helping bridge the 20-year gap. Early audience and critical feedback praises her ability to portray Andy as both nostalgic for her runway days and matured by real world journalism experiences. The dynamic between Hathaway and Streep on screen remains a highlight, evolving from mentor protege conflict to a more nuanced collaboration in a changing industry. Emily Blunt reprises her role as Emily Charlton, Miranda's former first assistant, known for her sharp wit, British sarcasm, and fashion obsession. In the sequel, Emily's character has advanced significantly, reportedly holding a high position at Dior or a similar fashion house, positioning her as a potential rival or complicated ally in the story's central conflicts. Blunt's performance adds energy and comic sharpness, though some notes suggest her arc involves bolder, more antagonistic traits compared to the original's eager assistant. Her chemistry with the core cast continues to deliver memorable moments, expanding on the sassy dynamic that made her a breakout in the first film. Blunt's return completes the core four along Streep, Hathaway, and Tucci. Her character's evolution reflects broader themes of career progression and shifting loyalties in fashion and media. Interviews from the press tour highlight Blunt's enthusiasm for revisiting Emily while exploring new facets, including potential romantic or professional subplots that intersect with new characters. Stanley Tucci returns as Nigel Kipling, the creative director and fashion insider whose expertise and calm demeanor provided balance and humor in the original. In the sequel, Nigel continues to offer industry wisdom, with arcs involving mentorship, key speeches, and emotional depth that resonated with audiences. Tucci's elegant performance brings continuity and heart, particularly in scenes exploring loyalty, change, and the personal costs of the fashion world. His rapport with Streep's Miranda and the rest of the ensemble remains one of the film's strengths. Tucci's Nigel serves as a steady presence amid the film's larger scale production, which includes grander sets, locations, and cameos. His character's development adds layers of introspection, making him more than comic relief in this updated story. Kenneth Branagh joins the cast as Stuart, widely reported as Miranda Priestley's husband. This new addition introduces personal dimensions to Miranda's life, humanizing the formidable editor in ways the original film only hinted at. Branagh, an Oscar winning actor and director known for Shakespearean roles and blockbusters like the Dunkirk Ensemble, brings gravitas and sophistication to the part. His presence allows exploration of Miranda's vulnerabilities and work life balance in the sequel's narrative. Branagh's casting adds prestige and dramatic weight. Scenes involving Stewart reportedly provide quieter, character driven moments amid the fashion and media chaos, offering insight into Miranda's private world 2 decades later. Simone Ashley appears as Amari Mari. The Bridgerton and the idea of U-Star brings fresh energy and contemporary appeal as a younger figure in the fashion or journalism sphere. Her role likely represents the next generation navigating runway's environment, creating contrasts and connections with the legacy characters. Ashley's rising stardom and poised screen presence make her a fitting addition to the glamorous ensemble. Lucy Liu takes on the role of Sasha Barnes, a high profile character entangled in professional and personal storylines, possibly involving media scoops, engagements, or corporate intrigue. Liu, celebrated for Charlie's Angels, Kill Bill, and Elementary, infuses the film with sharp intelligence and star power. Her casting expands the film's diversity and brings experience in strong, complex female roles that align with the sequel's themes of power and ambition. Justin Theroux plays Benji Barnes, connected to Sasha and potentially involved in romantic or business subplots with Andy or other characters. Theroux's versatile career, from the leftovers to comedies and action, suits a multifaceted role in the high stakes world of the sequel. His addition introduces dynamic interpersonal tensions and modern relationships. Patrick Bramwell portrays Peter, contributing to the supporting ensemble with comedic or dramatic beats. Known for Australian television and international roles, Bramwell adds texture to the office and social dynamics surrounding Runway. Tracy Thoms reprises her role as Lily from the original film, providing continuity in Andy's personal circle. Her return grounds the sequel in established relationships while allowing evolution over the intervening years. Tibor Feldman also returns as Irv Ravitz, the executive figure from the first film, maintaining corporate continuity at Elias Clark. His presence ties the sequel to the original power structures now under threat. BJ Novak joins as Jay. The Office alum and writer brings sharp humor and timing, likely delivering witty commentary on the industry's changes. His casting adds meta layers given his screenwriting background. Caleb Heron appears as Charlie, injecting contemporary comedic energy. The comedian and social media personality represent fresher voices in the cast, appealing to younger demographics while fitting into ensemble scenes at runway or social events. Helen J. Shen plays Jean, contributing to the diverse supporting cast with nuanced performances in professional or personal scenes. Her inclusion broadens the film's representation in the fashion and media worlds. Rachel Bloom takes on Talia, likely bringing musical comedy flair or sharp dialogue to her scenes. The crazy ex girlfriend creator and star adds versatility to the ensemble. Other notable cast members include Pauline Chalamet, Larry Mitchell as Mac, Conrad Ricamora, and additional supporting players filling out runways, bustling offices, and event scenes. The casting directors, Ellen Lewis and Shena Markovits, faced the challenge of assembling talent that could match the original's iconic performances while introducing new dynamics. The sequel features an array of high profile cameos that enhance its fashion world authenticity and spectacle. Lady Gaga delivers a memorable musical or appearance cameo, reportedly persuaded by Streep herself. Fashion icons like Donatella Versace, models Naomi Campbell and Heidi Klum, and others, including athletes and influencers, populate runway shows, parties, and magazine events. These cameos elevate production values and provide visual feasts that celebrate and satirize the industry's evolution. The core returning quartet, Streep, Hathaway, Blunt, and Tucci, forms the emotional and narrative heart, with their established chemistry driving key interactions. New additions like Brana, Liu, Theru, Ashley, and others expand the world, introducing fresh conflicts involving corporate takeovers, digital shifts, rival ambitions, and personal relationships. Casting choices reflect a balance between nostalgia and modernity, with younger talents like Ashley and Huron bridging generational gaps. Salaries for the leads highlighted Hollywood's commitment to star driven projects, with the favored nation structure ensuring equity among Streep, Hathaway, and Blunt. This deal reportedly facilitated reuniting the cast after years of speculation. Production involved filming in New York, capturing the city's fashion energy on a grander scale than the original. Casting extended beyond principals to create a believable runway ecosystem. Background performers, assistants, designers, and event attendees populate scenes with authenticity, supported by costume design that updates the original's influential looks for 2026 sensibilities. The inclusion of real fashion figures in cameos blurs lines between fiction and reality, much like the first film's cultural impact. Critical and audience reactions to the performances vary, with praise often centering on the returning star's enduring appeal and the seamless integration of newcomers. Streep's nuanced Miranda, Hathaway's grounded Andy, Blunt's evolved Emily, and Tucci's heartfelt Nigel receive consistent acclaim. Newer roles add necessary friction and humor to the plot centered on media decline, corporate intrigue, and personal reckonings. The casting process, guided by experienced directors like Lewis and Markowitz, involved careful consideration of chemistry readouts, availability, and alignment with thematic updates. Auditions and negotiations spanned months, prioritizing actors who could handle both the glamour and the satire. The result is an ensemble that feels both familiar and expanded, ready to explore how the characters and the industry have changed over 2 decades. Further supporting roles feature performers like George C. Wolfe, Daniel Liu, Bria Condon, Esko Jule, Rishi Mukherjee, Wes McGee, Eloise Rowe, Colleen Dengel, Suzanne Dengel, Kennedy Walsh, and others rounding out the extensive credits. Each contributes to the film's dense, lively atmosphere, whether in office banter, fashion show chaos, or intimate character moments. Overall, The Devil Wears Prada 2's casting succeed in honoring the original while building a robust new chapter. The blend of Oscar winners, established stars, rising talent, and celebrity cameos creates a high profile package that leverages nostalgia without relying solely on it. Performances drive the story of ambition, adaptation, and legacy in a fashion media world facing existential questions, making the ensemble one of the sequel's strongest assets. Reviews number 1. In a key scene from The Devil Wears Prada 2, Meryl Streep's Miranda Priestley gently asks Stanley Tucci's Nigel if she's been taking advantage of him for the past 20 years. The scene is played as if it comes from a genuine place, seemingly intended to make viewers say, "Ah," as Miranda finally recognizes her second in command's skill and dedication to the magazine. Unfortunately, the scene falls flat on its face because seemingly everyone involved with Prada 2 forgot that the first movie ended with Miranda purposefully screwing Nigel out of a promotion he deserved to secure the future of her own career. It's a key moment that leads Anne Hathaway's Andy Sachs to leave the magazine and Miranda behind, vowing not to become that kind of person. But that kind of person no longer exists in The Devil Wears Prada 2. There is no devil here, only an aimless, mischaracterized shell of a once interesting character. When trailers for the film dropped, some fans questioned why Miranda seemingly couldn't remember her history with Andy and Emily Blunt's Emily Charlton, going so far as to wonder if she had dementia. Those concerns were laughable to me. Obviously, Miranda just didn't care about her assistants and was being her usual thorny self. Sadly, it turns out those fans were right. Not about the dementia, but about Miranda being nothing like her former self. In fact, the entirety of Prada 2 is as aimless and meandering as Miranda's character has become. There's a weak and uninteresting plot, no real character development, and barely even any fashion but plenty of nostalgia bait. The film runs just under 2 hours long, yet somehow feels like it's pushing three, moving from scene to scene with no sense of purpose or reason. It's a disappointing result for a highly anticipated sequel to a popular film, but at least Lady Gaga gets to take the stage for an electrifying fashion show that's unfortunately just as random and meaningless as anything else in this film. None of our main characters even bother to watch it. The Devil Wears Prada 2 shines a light on an important topic. The one pleasant surprise about The Devil Wears Prada 2 lies in its exploration of journalism's importance in a changing world that only cares about social media clicks and using AI to suck the creative soul out of art. Andy and her entire team of journalists suddenly lose their jobs due to budget cuts, leading her to be rehired at Runway as their new features editor. Andy tries her best to steer Runway and Miranda out of a PR crisis, writing thought provoking pieces that no one reads. Focusing the entire film on that storyline may have resulted in something more entertaining, but halfway through it switches to another road business takeover plot. This time, the new owner of Runway's parent company tries to do a corporate restructuring and threaten Miranda's livelihood. There's another side plot focusing on Andy writing a tell-all book about Miranda, a reference to how the original The Devil Wears Prada book was written. This would also be a more interesting storyline to follow, but it peters out weakly. Instead of drawing you in with an engaging story, the film seems more concerned with making you remember how much you liked the first one. Remember those jokes, remember when this character did that, remember that outfit. It gets to a point where even if you don't remember something, you can tell some kind of reference is being made because they're so obvious. This much anticipated sequel lacks strong characters. It's like Prada 2 just wants to replay the hits of the first film. Miranda's job is in trouble. Andy is desperately trying to save her, and Nigel is hardworking but overlooked. Somehow, none of these dynamics have evolved in 20 years, to the point where Andy's desperation want to help Miranda just seems sad for a 40 something year old woman who has her own life and career to worry about. Emily is the only character who seems to have changed over the years, perhaps because Emily Blunt is the only actor putting in a real effort. Stanley Tucci is decent as well, but Hathaway and Streep's performances are shockingly phoned. In Blunt seems to be the only person who's considered how their character evolved after the events of the first film, and it shows in her performance. Hathaway and Andy just seem happy to be here at all, albeit bogged down with an uninteresting romance plot that's been shoved in for no reason. Meanwhile, Meryl Streep seems as uninterested in being in this movie as Miranda is in speaking to Andy. Miranda is uncharacteristically passive. Sure, it's been 20 years and her reign of terror has been ended by numerous HR complaints. But Miranda doesn't take any action at all. She simply floats about, buffeted by winds created by other characters. She has one good scene with Emily and several funny jokes, but no character development or real purpose in this story. Simone Ashley looks fantastic as Miranda's new right hand woman, but she and the other assistant, played by Caleb Heron, have no story either. Andy's assistant Jin Chow, played by Helen Jason, at least gets something small to do. Lady Gaga has a cameo as herself in one of the best scenes in the film, performing her excellent new song, Shape of a Woman, at Milan Fashion Week. The scene is electrifying and Gaga's performance is incredible. But what could be a stunning third act set piece becomes a 1.5-minute music video as half of the main characters drive away from the fashion show as quickly as possible. Final thoughts on The Devil Wears Prada 2. There's plenty of other celebrity cameos and some great outfits, but The Devil Wears Prada 2 is much more interested in nostalgia bait than telling an entertaining story. It deserves recognition for shining a light on the importance of true journalism and human creativity. But the movie isn't truly about these topics. They're more of a backdrop for the meandering parade of characters moving aimlessly from scene to scene. Unfortunately, even The Devil Wears Prada can't escape the hell of weakly written, poorly paced nostalgia bait sequels, dash tributes as spin offs that are starting to define the 2020s. Number 2, Devil Wears Prada 2 is not just a sequel, but an entirely new story that explores the complexities of running a magazine and being a journalist in the modern age. It is full of nostalgia, cameos, and references from the first installment of the film, most of which I was a fan of. The excitement I felt upon hearing Madonna's iconic song Vogue in the theater was enough to make me enjoy the new sequel, but luckily there was so much more to love. The film was as chaotic as it was iconic, and I just went along for the ride. The film opens with Andy Sachs, Anne Hathaway, finally living out her life as a hard-working journalist. Although her work is award-winning, she is fired via text within the first few minutes of the movie, sparking the modern-day conflict of journalism being underappreciated, a development that has occurred in the 2 decades since we last saw these characters. When Runway magazine, run by Miranda Priestley, Meryl Streep, is also facing scandal, Andy returns to the team decades later, this time as the features editor of the magazine. But this film couldn't just be about Miranda maliciously commanding Andy around the office and criticizing her wardrobe all over again. To keep the pace going, the film introduced new conflicts that the pair had to work together to solve. Instead of watching Andy continuously struggling to stay afloat at Runway like in the first movie, we see her make career wins every step of the way and slowly build Miranda's trust. At a certain point, though, there was so much to follow and a feeling of monotony set in. Every 30 minutes, a new career ending issue arises, and the team has to work together closer than they'd hoped to save the day. Along with Andy's new role was the introduction of way too many new characters. I couldn't keep up with who was returning from the first movie and who was new to the cast. The majority seemed to be the latter, The cameos were also interestingly blended, as there were more characters being introduced than people playing themselves. The film also gives Andy a love interest because apparently movies about women can't go without one, even if they add almost nothing to the story. The man she kind of falls in love with is Peter Patrick Bramall, who isn't given a last name because of how unimportant he is. The lovebirds meet at a remodeled apartment complex when Andy goes on a tour in search of a new place, where she meets the contractor. They share a few words that last all of 2 minutes, go on a date, and I guess are in a relationship. It's unclear. It felt like such an unnecessary subplot, and I felt absolutely nothing when Andy had to go away for work, leaving them conflicted over an unfinished argument. The Devil Wears Prada 2 was packed with references to the first film, but my favorites were the ones that showed how different the workplace was 2 decades earlier. Miranda constantly makes inappropriate remarks about her employees, and her new assistant, Simon Ashley, corrects her throughout the whole film. There is a running joke about both bosses, Miranda and the new head of Elias Clark Publications, J. B.J. Novak, walking on eggshells to be politically correct. It was funny when Miranda continued the bit because we are aware of her history of being quite cruel to staff, but with Jay, it just didn't land. One of the best parts of the first film was the outfits. This is a fashion magazine after all. They were unique, fabulous, and seeing Andy rise to the occasion throughout the movie was so rewarding. This film didn't do the fashion justice. Most outfits were gorgeous but understated, which is very typical of this decade, but a part of me missed the complete boldness of the 2000s. How could I talk about The Devil Wears Prada 2 without mentioning Nigel, Stanley Tucci? He is the hardest working and most loyal character in the first film, and he doesn't let up in the second one. 20 years after the first installment of The Devil Wears Prada, I finally got to live out the full experience as intended. Watching Miranda Priestley and Andy Sachs work together on the silver screen, and it only kind of disappointed. Number 3. With fashion magazine Runway in jeopardy, long serving editor in chief Miranda Meryl Streep and her former assistant Anne Hathaway form a shaky alliance to secure its future. In an age where powerful leaders can't seem to get enough of hearing their own voices, the silence of Miranda Priestley, Meryl Streep, is deafening. As imperious editor of the fashion industry shaping magazine Runway, a pursing of her lips causes prestigious designers to lurch back to the drawing board. If actually moved to speak, her dismissive go to, that's all, sends employees spiraling into despair. All of this made 2006 The Devil Wears Prada deliciously entertaining. Through the eyes of Anne Hathaway's aspiring journalist Andy, we witnessed an Alexander McQueen clad master keeping her ship afloat through ferocious tenacity, some personal sacrifice, and a carefully wielded wordless glare. When this long awaited sequel calls for more dialogue, then those lines had better count, as they could risk diluting her monstrous power. Hathaway maintains plucky affability despite her character becoming more world weary, while Blunt's comedic timing and flashes of vulnerability save the film from feeling too serious. Credit is due to returning director David Frankel and screenwriter Aline Brosh McKenna, who have resisted the steadfast demand for a follow up for 20 years, insisting that they would revisit Runway only when the right story presented itself. Instead of falling back on the same themes of the first film entirely, they move the story forward into the tumultuous landscape of journalism today. Andy, now an award winning reporter, becomes a casualty of cutbacks at her publication. At the same time, Miranda is accidentally embroiled in a sweatshop scandal through a story she commissioned. And so her one time underling is brought in by higher powers to rescue the magazine's editorial reputation. Upon arrival, Andy discovers that budgets have dwindled. Words like engagement and digital dominate meeting rooms, and perhaps worst of all, Miranda must pander to advertisers. Well, one in particular. Scorned former assistant Emily Blunt, who now holds a senior role at Dior. It's painful to see this titan of industry navigate such choppy seas. Although there are still moments of levity, Miranda trying to hang up her own coat after she's been banned from throwing them at her assistants can't help but provoke a smile. Yet, while the future of print journalism is a worthy subject to explore, Empire subscriptions are available through our website and gives the story a grounded and interesting setup. The drama feels rather frictionless. In The Devil Wears Prada, we enjoyed a peek into the lavish and aspirational world of fashion, weighted by Miranda and Andy's sparky dynamic. Now that partnership is slightly sturdier, and we are instead encouraged to fear BJ Novak's Silicon Valley, Style Sion and Justin Theroux as a boss level tech entrepreneur, both of whom are largely forgettable. Thankfully, the core cast are anything but. Hathaway maintains plucky affability despite her character becoming more world weary, while Blunt's comedic timing and flashes of vulnerability saved the film from feeling too serious. Stanley Tucci as Miranda's stalwart right hand man. Nigel returns as the pocket square adorned shoulder to cry on, though does get a few welcome moments to shine. Around them, the film's world remains a taffeta-draped playground through which the characters showcase traffic-stopping designer ensembles, reminding us why they risk it all for runway. And at its epicenter, Streep lets us a little deeper into Miranda's psyche without losing that magnetic elusiveness. Her power survives intact, even if she's not given a worthy adversary to unleash it upon. A sequel that serves its characters with a fresh story instead of relying solely on the tropes of its predecessor. This high fashion tale could have benefited from higher stakes, but Streep and company remain as in vogue as ever. Number 4 midway through The Devil Wears Prada 2. As Runway magazine faces the latest of many challenges to its future integrity and potentially even existence as a publication. Now jaded journo Andy Sachs bemoans the corporate repackaging of so much media into a smaller, cheaper, more efficient and less valuable facsimile of itself. She is too polite to say enshittification, the buzzword that the internet has lately applied to this trend, with particular regard to online platforms, but it hangs almost audibly in the air. That's a gutsy idea to invoke in a sequel aiming to recapture the glories of a much loved media property from 20 years ago. The good news is that The Devil Wears Prada 2 is not willfully enshittified. It's a sequel made with intelligence and respect for both its predecessor and the legions who still love it. So much so that it functions less as a follow up than as a kind of tribute act, albeit one featuring all the original talent, picking out the comic and dramatic highs from the first film and faithfully replaying them with the same moves and cadences. But it is, by almost any metric a lesser movie, narratively, emotionally, and cinematically flatter, buoyed by game performances that nonetheless steadfastly fail to surprise. And in almost every way that it falls short, it illustrates something that's been taken from mainstream Hollywood movie making since 2006. Let's not overstate the bar set by The Devil Wears Prada, which arrived that summer as a smart, funny, fluffy bit of studio counter programming in its opening weekend. It finished second at the box office to, if you care to remember, Superman Returns in the pre-streaming days when female skewing comedies weren't a comparative rarity at the multiplex. David Frankel's film was no masterpiece, but it had remarkable cultural staying power, in large part thanks to Meryl Streep's ingeniously underplayed turn as Miranda Priestley, a fashion mag gorgon plainly modeled on Anna Wintour, in some part thanks to a fresh off the runway wardrobe that fueled a million makeover fantasies, but also because its tale of a plucky intern clinging to a steep career ladder resonated with a generation of graduates entering a forbidding job market. As such, it was both fairy tale and cautionary tale for a certain strain of millennials who have held onto it as a comfort movie of its era. All of which is to say the original film's artistic accomplishments are perfectly possible to emulate or imitate outright, as the sequel, again directed by Frankel and written by Aline Brosh McKenna, is mostly content to do. But that intangible touchstone status is harder to repeat, even as the new film, set 2 decades, one global recession, one global pandemic, and an ever mutating social media revolution later, likewise aims to capture the fraught spirit of its moment. That's clear from the opening scene, which reintroduces Andy, a sleek Anne Hathaway, no longer gawky and hideous skirted, as the socially conscious investigative journalist she always wanted to be, collecting an award for her work at fictitious left-leaning paper The New York Vanguard, right at the very moment that she and all her colleagues are fired by text. As yet another legacy publication bites the dust. If this early turn will be greeted with sighs of recognition by anyone working in journalism, the chaser is less familiar. Andy is swiftly headhunted to be the new, extremely well paid features editor of none other than Runway magazine, currently weathering a PR storm over a story that saw it accidentally endorse a sweatshop fast fashion label. If Andy is there to give the embattled brand some serious journalistic cred that cuts no ice with her old tormentor Miranda, as imperious and impossible to please as ever, she sets about challenging and belittling the new girl as if no time had passed at all, instead of chasing down unpublished Harry Potter manuscripts. Andy is instead tasked with securing an interview with elusive tycoon Sasha Barnes, Lucy Liu, sorely underused. Quietly scathing rival Emily Blunt, is no longer a runway colleague but a Dior executive to be appeased. And the threat to Miranda's queendom comes not from a French fellow editor but a terminally unchick tech bro, BJ Novak, looking to cut every possible corner. But these are mere placeholder plot points. The essential dynamic is unchanged, so nostalgists can revel in the first film's catty office politics, the unfailingly delicious chill of Streep's withering delivery. You are such a favorite, she tells one cameoing super celeb with a calculated hesitation that would cut mere mortals to the quick, and the counterbalancing warmth of Stanley Tucci's long suffering creative director Nigel. still there to give Andy a tough love pep talk at the most opportune moment. As for Andy, she's still out of place, but now with a grown authority that makes her a less vulnerable heroine and so a less compelling one. She's also handed a frictionless non starter of a romantic subplot with a blandly amiable Australian contractor played by Colin from account star Patrick Bramall, though he gets more to do than Kenneth Branagh, inexplicably wasted as Miranda's doting husband. 20 years ago, he was filing for divorce. Today, he's a dedicated wife guy. Some things do get better. The stakes aren't as high for any individual character as they are for Runway itself. As the film's glitzy Milan set third act ultimately comes down to a battle for the magazine's soul between a few billionaires with varying degrees of moral virtue. Pretty true to life, perhaps, but not the stuff of great drama. There's fun to be had along the way, be it in Brosh McKenna's amusingly brittle dialogue or the bird of paradise spectacle of Molly Rogers' costumes. Though the baroque absurdist touch that couture doyenne Patricia Field previously brought to the proceedings is missed, as is the way the clothes were showcased by the first film's crisp, gleaming look. Though DP Florian Ballhaus returns here, the greyish veil cast over scene after scene in The Devil Wears Prada 2 tidily demonstrates how significantly standards of studio movie lighting have shifted in recent years. Miranda Priestley herself would certainly have some words on this front. Ultimately, however, the film's chief pleasures are those of practiced professionals doing their job and doing it well. None of the stars here is slacking, and their combined, easily resumed chemistry ensures that this sequel, for good long stretches, feels like old times, even if it's hard to imagine fans of its predecessor cherishing repeat viewings to quite the same extent. Something that hasn't changed, moreover, is Streep's effortless MVP status. Her Moran may now be too familiar to be menacing, but the hushed, lacerating economy of her line readings, the glassy reserve of her body language, the layers of passive aggressive meaning she compacts into one arched brow or tight half smile, all invite a kind of in the presence of greatness awe. Boy, I love working, says Miranda quite sincerely, and so it seems does Streep. And work as this alternately breezy and quite pessimistic crowd pleaser is quick to remind us, isn't to be taken for granted.